up, guys? Miss here from Creative Shock, just going over my Ensoul list. This is a list that I ran in the current store champ season, and I was going to bring this to the channel as the first deck tech for Creative Shock, but then kind of got a bit of a feeling that I was probably going to run it for Auckland Ascent. So this I ran to 3 store champion victories and top 4 at Auckland Ascent. So it is Ensoul Lorraine, which is like pretty funny because I was on an Ensoul Lorraine like a year ago. This is obviously an optimized list. What I thought I'll do is I will discuss the cards, but then I'll kind of like talk about the cards and I guess the play style for different matchups and my experience at running this list at Ascent into like wind allies and water allies and Fire Merlin and an aggro Fire Xander as well. With that said, this list isn't kitted for Rye. If you are worried about Rise, I'd probably throw it through Ignite the Souls in the list. However, I didn't expect to see too many Rise, especially if they didn't see him early, and my one loss in Swiss was to a Rye. His name was Josh, and he absolutely smashed me. However, he kept playing and he pushed my breakers up, so thanks Josh. I said that to him in person, and I will say that again and again because it was a good weekend for Creative Shock. So I'll start off here with the standard package: Spirit of Fire, Lorraine level 1, Lorraine level 2, and Lorraine Crux Knight. Obviously with this list, you're trying to race to the Crux Knight, so I know it is tempting to try set up that perfect fame sweep against ally based decks, but if you can net one card from the Lorraine level 2, and sometimes you can +2 if you just swing the Sword of Seeking, kill a unit, they lose a card, and then you gain a card. That's kind of all you need, and you just, the idea of the flame sweep is kind of enough caution to these ally based decks to allow you to get to level 3 without taking on too much damage. Also to note that in some matchups you feel like you might, with that said, sometimes you do take it slow, but that's really matchup dependent, and if you haven't received too much pressure. Standard item GCR, it's just that extra card, and then this is your insurance plan if things aren't going well. But most of the time I play this just to Ensoul a turn earlier. Sword of Seeking, this is a sword I took out every game pretty much with Lorraine's on enter ability. Never swing it early. I always used to save the swing for when I went to level 2, and then a lot of the times I'll then goes to Pendragon this back, so you get the swing, the +2 plus the draw card, and then you still have the sword out if you dungeon guide into level 3. And you can actually see that on the game that I streamed against my teammate Yap and the eventual winner of Ascent, that I use that strategy quite a bit in those games, and I kind of use that strategy all through Swiss and in the top 8. So you don't want to waste durability counters on the Sword of Seeking early. The rest of the swords don't ever really come out until Ensoul. Sword of Adversity, I chose this over Ornamental just on those games where you might need Sword of Adversity early to kill an ally because you don't really have strong allies yourself, but if you need to kill an early Asian protector, you might need the Sword of Adversity. That's why I went over that instead of Ornamental. Drawn Blade, pull this out, Pendragon the back, draw cards, Ensoul draws a card. It's a keep cycle. There's enough said. Carnman represents 4 damage on your Ensoul turn, 3 off its attack, and then 1 once it's in the banish zone. Fire Tongue pairs well with Farouk too, because even if you don't want to swing Lorraine with it, it is in itself fire, so you get that extra damage. And you can also kind of helps too with Spirit's Blessing if you want to attack with this. Banish a fire card you're not doing anything with it, keep it on the field, and then you can Spirit's Blessing it back. So it's got a lot of versatility, and it represents 3 damage. Whereas Longsword, you kind of go to with the Spirit Blessing plan that this deck has. For the longest time and during most of the store championships, this used to actually be an ornamental greatsword, and then just pivoted to the sea sword, so that if you are Ensoul early, you get the glimpse and you kind of get to keep that pressure on. Because the worst thing is, after you've got your Ensoul, you don't have much else in the hand, and then your next couple of draws are just more floating memory. So you kind of really want to see this sword. You kind of really use this sword just to dig a little bit deeper to try to close out those games. And that's your sword package. You're running 7 swords and 1 Resistance. So this deck is all in on Ensoul. It is pretty consistent. I don't think there was a best of 3 where I didn't Ensoul. And like I probably Ensouled multiple times per game. I think the most I Ensouled in one game was 3 times, like back to back to back. And with obviously 4 crack sites, you can Ensoul 8 times theoretically with this deck. One other thing, some matchups when you do Ensoul, you might only bring out 6 swords. If you don't have another attack in hand and you can't close the game out, it's actually pretty good to leave 1 sword in the material deck, so that you can then bring it out again on your next material and still be able to swing with Lorraine. I usually, if I'm doing that, keep the Sword of Adversity, but that's up to you depending on the matchup. Now when we get to the main deck, I'll start with the Shieldmate. Just a great addition to FTC. So obviously this is an addition from the earlier Ensoul list, but you can cremate it. It's a 2 cost, so it's another essentially Honorable Vanguard. So in your starting 7 card hand, you now have Honorable Vanguard and this that you can cremate, or you can leave this up there just to soak up pressure. So very good in the ally matchups, especially like the wind allies and the water allies. And then if they're not running raccoons, where you're not even worried about once they clear this, they're going to eat it, you just leave it on the board all day. Obviously in the Merlin matchups, you don't want to put this out if you're expecting them to go to Merlin next turn, because they'll clear this and then eat it. So you kind of just have to play around that. Dungeon Guide. Your play pattern with this is on a 7 card hand, go to level 2, Dungeon Guide to level 3, goes to Pendragon, push a sword back, get the 2 cards you've just lost on Dungeon Guide, and then when you on your next turn, once you GCR, you're back to 7 cards, you're back to Ensoul. So you're standard. Savage Slash, it's an attack with floating memory, good late in the game. Once you've got 7 swords banished, this is coming for 9, but just good early to keep that floating memory. Only 2 resolute stands in the main board, because in those ally lists you do have flame sweeps, and when you do Ensoul you can clear a board, so you don't want to see too many of these, especially because they are dead in some matchups. They're not very good into Merlins, and they're obviously terrible into Rise. And I did bring these into 4 for some matchups, but not even into like some of the ally matchups. I kept these at 3 because having multiple of these in hand isn't always the best. You only really need 1 to try to get to that next turn when you're pretty much killing them. Fast cures. So for the first half of Store Champs, this was Tempered Steel, just because it was an additional fire card, and obviously I've got the Rending Flames package in this deck. However, with testing into my teammate Yap, who was playing Merlin with raccoons, I just needed another source of fast floating memory. And then because there is periods of this deck where you do go down on cards, where you can recover for, and it does come in clutch in some of those matchups. So yeah, a later addition, but one I felt really good about during the tournament, and glad to put it in there. Honorable Vanguard, it's floating memory. It's if you start and you see that with a cremation, you're pretty happy. Yeah, best play. Flame Rune Swordsman, it's a good card to like actually control a bit of the board, and then you're not absolutely shattered if you lose it. But probably out of the whole deck, one of the cards that was just least impactful for me. I can't remember ever playing this to play it. And if I saw this in opening hand, the 7, it didn't really feel too great. Obviously, you want to see your tactful and shield mates. So yeah, Swordsman, Flame Rune Swordsman might be a card that if I kept optimizing, maybe I'd switch it. I don't really know what card I'd bring in for it at the moment, but potential to be removed. And in terms of like floating memory, that's all of it, but you can see I've got a 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. I did run down to 16. I felt like that wasn't enough, and so I kept it at 20, but I do feel like maybe I can drop this down to 18. And if I was, I'd probably get rid of 2 Flame Rune Swordsmen. I'd probably add in a couple of fire cards. Personally, I'd probably add in the Blazing Throw, just because I like that card. Hasty, your standard fire engine. I'm not going to wait on too much on this. Everyone knows what you do this for. Cycle, get rid of your floating memory. Help dig for Ensoul. Sometimes you're playing this and you don't really need the floating memory, but you're just trying to dig. This deck, the keys to success of this deck is to dig as much as possible. So yeah, if you see in the game 3 of the semi-final, I think I went through 31 cards before I saw Ensoul, or 29 cards, I can't remember exactly, but it was like there was a lot of cards I ended up going through, and you're just like digging until you find the card that you need. So don't be afraid to throw away non-floating memory cards and just use this as a play. Flame Sweep, didn't really sweep that many times. There was into a Wind Arrow match in Swish. It was actually Unyang, the player that won, that came runner up, that came second. He actually thought I was on Merlin in the first game, so he dumped the board, and then I leveled up and flame swept. So yeah, a bit of a give me that one, but then the game 2 and 3 was pretty hard. He's a very good player, but yeah, just your normal flame sweep. Before I talk about matchups and like how do you play flame sweeps, you can actually also do flame sweeps into water, and I did in my round 8 match. You can flame sweep into water and really bait creatures out of them and then clean them up, and I'll go into that when I get into the sideboard. Cremation Ritual, I'll sacrifice anything to dig any creature on the board. You're not winning by maintaining a board state. That's not how this deck wins. So once you got some value out of a card, if you don't have the Ensoul, cremate it. I cremated Pendragons. I cremated every creature that I have, and you just the name of the game is finding Ensoul. Creative Shock. Obviously in the Merlin matchups, there was doing a lot of passing and then playing Creative Shock. That's just playing around raccoons and also not trying to give any information to my opponent. Also in like the first turns, you're not really doing a lot of gameplays, so you even know the idea of like I'll play a Creative Shock and then maybe it'll give me another play that turn. You kind of don't want to do. You really want to try and maintain 7 cards for as long as possible with Ensoul, or the idea of that if you Dungeon Guide and Pendragon up, you've got Ensoul the next turn. Rending Flames, this card came in and out for Devastating Blow. I like Devastating Blow for like the Deers, just because they can't retaliate, so that saves you another 4 damage. But then Rending just felt a lot better after. Was kind of how I got past Resolute Stance or well-timed Resolute Stance. So if they Resolute and then soak up all that Ensoul damage, if I had a Rending in hand, I didn't really care, because in the next turn I'm rendering for 10, double to 20. So like you're just gaining all that damage back. So that's why I decided to stay on Rending instead of going back to Devastating Blow. And Varrook, and because I had Varrook, Rending made more sense. This was probably in the sideboard, and then I put it in the main board to get around resolutes. If you are worried about resolutes or veiling or spell shields or any defensive card, Varuk just says not today, and I started just running them in the main board. And at worst, I used to throw them away for hasty or a creative shock, or was a card I didn't care about getting banished. But it's just giving me an option to get past resolute stands, which does eat up a lot of the Ensoul damage. Now the Crux package, it's at 15 Crux cards. It might seem a bit greedy, but I wouldn't touch the Crux package. I know some people will like, do you run Dispersion? You'd have to run different swords, and it's just not as consistent. And the reason why I went Spirit's Blessing instead of Dispersion is Spirit's Blessing draws a card. So you wake up your champion and it replaces itself, so you can keep that Ensoul train going. I'd say you win half your games after your first Ensoul, but with cards like Resolute and with creatures like the deer out there, sometimes you do need multiple Ensouls, or you do need an Ensoul and then a big attack that next turn. Spirit's Blessing allows you to get that big attack in the same turn you Ensoul, but not only that, it allows you just to dig another card deeper. And the name of this game is cycling, so that's why I went with Spirit's Blessing over Dispersion, but did play everything, tried Infusion, tried any Crux card in this package, but obviously talking with Yap and Lime when we was deciding to play this deck, Spirit's Blessing. So obviously I created Ensoul like a year ago, and Yap drove it to this level where it is at now. I made a couple of changes like the fast cure, and then we kinda collectively done the Seer Sword, but Spirit's Blessing, great card in this deck. Pendragon, probably the best card in the deck, probably the best card in the game for my opinion. Return of Regalia, draw 2 cards, replaces itself, 3 damage. It's just, the card's so unbroken. And finally, Ensoul. When I saw this card, it was released, or when I saw the spoiler, it was still in Prelude, and Kickstarter was about to get released. It was my favorite card from the start. So being able to do, have some success playing this card is awesome. So Ensoul brings out all your cards, all your swords, and allows them to attack like allies, with the key thing, like allies. They're not units, so anything that targets a unit doesn't work. Like Kohazu Trapper can't reduce a sword by 3. It can Lorraine, but not the swords, which is important and did come up in matches. Now to the sideboard. Voodoo and Protective Trinket. I was just expecting water. Me and Yap, going into this tournament, we expected water, and there was no way I was going to go to Ascent without taking this. And I had this in all my store champs too, just because when you are playing water, you can actually set up sweeps pretty easy, where you play a 9 card hand and you bring out the trinket and then you dungeon guide into a flame sweep. So that takes 9 cards, and how water plays, they usually hold up 3 cards just to be able to Song of Frost or Frostbind. At most they might have 4 cards. They can't really keep all their cards in hand and keep progressing their board. So they kind of get comfortable behind those 3 cards. They'll build their board, and especially if they have a Song of Frost, you can tell when they have a Song of Frost over Frostbind is when they're a bit more aggressive, building up a board of allies into a deck they know that has Flame Sweep. So in those matchups, if you can be patient and you can soak up some damage and you can build that 9 card hand, and that might be a turn of JCR pass, and you just got to take 6-7 damage, sometimes more, but then they're thrown another 2 units, and then you sweep that. It's game defining, it's game winning. It won me a game. Definitely a play. And then once you do that in a game, the water player then gets nervous and will hold extra cards. And those extra cards is not putting an ally. I'm talking about the water ally list here. They'll keep that in hand. They won't put that on the board, and then they're doing less damage to you, and that's how that gets you to level 3 without taking damage and get you to that Ensoul. And then once you Ensoul, these ally decks, they can't handle the post Ensoul game state. So I versed a water ally list that goes to 3 in Swiss, and I also versed like in the quarterfinals. I versed one. You just play a lot more patient. If you do anything, you are like holding 2 cards extra in hand. You do have to respect Frostbind, unless you do want to like if it's your only out, you have to go for something, then go for it. But if you can play around it, that's how you're gonna win those matchups. There's sideboards Typh. This was for Rye. I play this out early to a Rye. They lose cards and then kind of slow them down, because this deck has nothing for Rye, because it doesn't put a lot of early damage. I did that. I still got stomped. So like, yeah, the Rye, I'd probably add a couple of Ignite Souls, just so like when I'm doing a big turn, they can't get counters off it, because it doesn't have any quick damage. I tried Typh. Typh didn't really work that well. There's no other matchups like with no Sword of Avarice existing anymore where you really worry about Typh. Typh, I feel like, doesn't do much into Merlins. Personally, I don't think it does much into Merlins, because drawing 3 cards a turn is still pretty good. I felt like this is where, for Rise, is where it's probably the strongest, and even then, in my one match, it didn't perform that well. Lantern is just for those drill aggro fire decks, and then if I want to go for a rending, I can always send it back with the Pendragon, so I'm not too worried about having Lantern in the list. Extra Varuk, this was just in case there was some win lists that were playing Veiling. Just having extra Varuk to guarantee I can see it and then set up that kill turn. Extra Flame Sweep. When there's no allies, you don't really need it. Sometimes I actually brought in the Flame Sweep for Merlins, just because once you've Ensouled, sweeping for 9 still pushes some damage to the champion and does enough damage to like a Vanguard can then kill the deer. So has play. So sometimes like you don't want to say Flame Sweep if you're in a traditional Lorraine list, but after you've got 7 swords in the Banish Zone, 9 damage to everything is pretty sweet. Extra Rending if I feel like the matchup allows it. Didn't really play it all that in that many games. The Resolute Stance, like I said, if I was going back, I'd probably take 1 out and probably also take out a Typh, even like maybe the Varuk, just to free up a few slots and add some cards I want to. I'd probably add some cards I was thinking of adding, if Water Ally stays prominent, is probably Spurn to Ash, just to get rid of the Scepter. So I feel like that Scepter boosts that Dungeon Guide with the Scepters out, and pushing a lot of damage in one turn, like that shotgun sort of approach, is quite powerful. So having a way to deal with that would be good, because this list at the moment doesn't have any way to deal with Regalia. So your Wind Ally matchups, you control the board and card advantage. You gain card advantage by killing units, especially after level 2 Lorraine is where you get most of your card advantage into allies list, when you just naked attack with the sword, because it doesn't cost you a card and usually costs them a card to protect something, or they lose a creature. Flame Sweeps are great ways to clear the board and only use 1 card to get rid of multiple things. So that's your Wind Ally match. Control the board until you get to Ensoul range. Ensoul, if you can't kill them, clear the board, play the slower approach. Don't worry about just most of the time the Ensoul can kill the Wind Allies, because they usually stay at level 1 Lorraine. But if you feel they've got a deflecting edge, or they've got a resolute stand, clear the board. And if you want to, just swing the Carnarvon straight away at them, because that usually baits a resolute standout. So then if I see that, I can then make my call on what I want to do with the other swords. Water ally matchup, very similar to the wind ally matchup, except you play a little bit slower, and you have to understand that anything that you do you have to pass to its cost. Creative Shock doesn't cost 3, it costs 5. Savage Slash, all these cards. Once you understand that, you will see opportunities where your opponent overextends, and that's where you can kind of go ham. So for example, if I had a Creative Shock and a Savage Slash in hand, I'd Savage Slash and then hold the extra cards for Creative Shock until I had an opportunity, or I would not do that until my next turn, because getting Frostbind is probably gonna cost you the game. I don't play like they don't have it. I expect them to have it and play accordingly, unless it's my only out is to go for it. The Rye matches, you have to race, especially with this deck, because it's not teched for them. You have to race and hope they don't have a spell shield. If they have a spell shield, they're going to wait until they're about to be dead, or until you're presenting the most amount of damage. I tried some shenanigans with Spirits Bursting a sword away to then re-attack, but it is a hard matchup. Merlins, you can only use Floating Memory until they get to level 1, because they can dungeon guide to level 2, and if they have raccoons, only play Fast Memory. Once after that, you're playing cards. So guys, I think for that cut out there when I was going over the Merlin matchup. So yeah, essentially you only play Floating Memory once they at their level 1. Once they've got a chance of going to Merlin, you've got to stop that Floating Memory, because if they can eat that on Merlin 2 when they go into Kingslayer, they get that immediate second counter, draw a card, and kind of keeps their game plan going. They're all the matchups I played. And the last one, Aggro Fire Xander, you kind of race to 3. You got Flame Sweeps to like clear their boards and get some cards back, but don't be afraid to like dungeon guide from level 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, because they can kill, like they're always within range of killing you. So if you can get to level 3 quicker, it just makes it a lot harder, and hence why I'm thinking of like adding Spurn to Ashes into this deck. I had Varukan Acolytes, and that felt good killing the Poison Dagger, but I think Spurns might be an addition to this deck, just to kill Poison Daggers, Scepters, and there's a lot of Regalia that's pretty impactful. Okay, and that's it for this deck tech and matchup guide. I hope you enjoyed it. I know we'll try to get Yap to bring his hybrid Merlin. I know he's pretty busy, but we'll see if we can get him there. If you are going to play Ensoul, let us know how you go with it. I know there's a few more store champs and regionals coming up. I know that we've got one more in a couple of weeks. I'm probably not going to play Ensoul, or maybe I am, and I'm just trying to bait people not to run raccoons against me, because raccoons absolutely tortures this deck. I'm Gaz from Creative Shock. Leave a like, subscribe, all that jazz, and see you guys in the next one. Cheers.